Welcome, everyone. We are on. Okay. Continuing along in the theory and practice of universal ethics, the Noahide laws, by Rabbi Dr. Shimon Dovid Cowen of Australia. For those that have the book and are able to follow along inside, we are currently up to page 158 in the second section, the part about the practice as opposed to the theory. This is part 2, and we are in chapter 6, section D, and we may finish this chapter today, and we may not. Okay, so without any further ado, we're in the middle here of discussing basically two opinions amongst the codifiers as to whether the details and all of the civil commandments that the Jewish people have as part of their 613 commandments in the Torah, which we know one way to divide up all the 613 commandments is some of them are between the Jew, between man and his God, and some are between man, the Jew, and his fellow Jew, or his fellow man. So the question is, when it comes to the Noahide, the non-Jew, so yes, it's true, there is only officially 7. However, do those 7 general commandments incorporate and include on a biblical level as part of the 7 all the details and many of the commandments that apply to the Jew as well in civil law? Or is it just extra piety and good ideas and suggestions, but they can make up their own laws, which means you can have each country or each community or group of people, as long as they're keeping the one positive commandment of the 7, which is dinim, to set up a court system, then they can make up their own laws. They don't have to follow the laws as they are in, for example, the book of Exodus in the Torah portion of Mishpatim, which is like chapter 22-ish, around there. And then of course, in Maimonides, and then, of course, in the later codifiers, and in the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish Code of Law, the section called Choshen Mishpat, which is basically all about monetary laws, civil laws, and all that. So they need not follow that. They can make up their own laws. That's really the question that we're dealing with. Now, we have a verse in the book of Isaiah, Yeshaya, that says that the world was not created in order to be chaotic, but rather in order to be settled and proper. It should be peacefully inhabited. All right. So therefore, we know that there are many things, and that's at the very least, that's the spirit of the 7 Noahide commandments, that to make sure that this world is run properly. And then we discussed, for example, which ones of the 7 or the 6 would certain things fall under. Which ones do they go under? For example, honoring parents, or charity, or education, and the like. And he gave a whole bunch of examples previously, that would be the practical legal difference between these two opinions. For instance, the laws of returning a lost item, the way they apply to a Jew, do they apply to the Noahide or do they not? And a whole bunch of other examples. That's pretty much where we're at. Again, page 158, towards the bottom of the page, D, society in ascent. The criteria of ascending rationality. The idea of rationality as the divinely taught guide to the harmonious habitation of the world. Meaning, who decides what makes sense? God. he created our mind. He's the creator of logic. However, if you leave it up to the individuals, different people not only have different opinions, but it can escalate very far. And people would say that this is irrational, or this is rationally correct and good and just, and this is not. And other people say that that's crazy, you're out of your mind. So we have two rational people have completely opposite opinions as to what makes sense, what's rational, what's irrational. So ultimately, it's the divine rational logic. So again, this idea of rationality has built into it a concept of advance, i.e., of progressively greater harmony and refinement. And let's see footnote 53 right now, although generally I try to wait with footnotes. Right now, 53 at the very bottom of page 158. The mission of the Noahide laws is to achieve the refinement and perfection of the creation. All right, that is from Likutei Sichos, the talks of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, volume 5. The potentiality of the individual human being through his or her study and performance of the Noahide commandments to become like the high priest of the Jewish people is set out in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 59a, and is explained as a perfection of inner worldly existence in Likutei Sichos, volume 27, volume 14, volume 5. This passage has also been understood as the foundation of the ruling of Rambam, that's Maimonides, in Hilchos Shemitah v'Yovel, the laws of the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, chapter 13, law 13, which speaks of the ability of an inhabitant of the world to be sanctified as holy of holies. So he basically brought down all the references. I think he got them all in the Likutei Sichos, 27, 14, and 5. There may be another one. At any rate, very interesting. See, let me try to clarify what he just brought down over here, because it's really, really exciting. It should be very exciting and empowering for a Noahide. At the end of the laws of Shemitah v'Yovel, as he references, the Rambam Maimonides, who is exact and precise, and his precision is beyond imagination, that a human being could be so exact and precise is mind-boggling. But be that as it may, Maimonides makes a statement based on the Talmud, as he referenced, Sanhedrin, that anyone, he actually says pretty clearly, he says any one of the human race, pretty much, that's his language, loosely translated, any human being, so it's pretty clear that he's not just speaking about a Jew, anyone can attain, anyone who wishes, he says all you have to do is want it, put your mind to it, and then just basically devote your life. Anyone can attain the level of sanctity of the Holy of Holies. Be like the high priest. Now, the reason I make such a huge deal out of this is tell that to a Jew, and instinctively, based on our Torah knowledge, a Jew, a learned Jew, would dismiss that. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Maybe you can make the argument that a Jew could become that holy like the high priest, and even that is a little bit difficult to explain. But that a Noahide, a non-Jew, can become like the Jewish high priest, what in the world does that mean? If you tell me that he's converting to Judaism and becoming a ger, or as we call it, a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, that's one thing. But he's saying, no, remaining a Noachide, remaining a non-Jew, a goy, can become Holy of Holies. That's amazing. And that is what the Rambam says. And the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach does stress that and bring that point out. Now, obviously, that would be you can't take it out of context, and you can't misquote it, you can't misunderstand it. I get that. He's still not Jewish. He still can't count, for example, as part of the quorum. You need 10 people to make up a minyan. We have to, for certain prayers and things like that, we need to have 10 adult, Jewish, free males in order to be able to say certain prayers and stuff. So a woman doesn't count. A boy under 13 doesn't count. The most righteous and intelligent and advanced Noachide doesn't count. I get that. And he's surely not a high priest, meaning he can't walk into the holy temple. But whatever it does mean, and the Rambam is telling it to us in his book of Jewish law, spiritually, he can attain the level of Holy of Holies. So that's pretty empowering. All right. And that is, or at least to some degree, that's the extreme. But the mission of the 7 Noachide commandments is just that, to refine and perfect the world. So, if I may, let's make a shift. And again, those of you that are listening to me, I don't think this would be your problem, but at least let's try to change the popular or the public perception or misunderstanding, which I think it's fair to say many people have this approach, this misunderstanding. And that is that the 7 Noachide commandments are obligatory and are simply to maintain some level of stability in the world. That's all. The world is not a jungle. Don't let people, do whatever they want. People should basically just behave. I mean, the Jewish people, of course, they have a spiritual mission, they have the Torah, etc., etc., etc. But your Noachide, no, he just has a bunch of don'ts. Don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery, etc. And I can understand and I can see where people have that idea. If I may, that would be the old school of thought. However, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is educating us, educating the world, and showing us the true Torah perspective, as he points out in this one place in Maimonides. Now, Maimonides wrote that close to 1,000 years ago. So, that's kind of old school. And it wasn't taken literally or to that extreme. And it's sort of like the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach is saying, stop. Examine what he says. Think about it. And apply it. All right. Bottom of 158. This can be achieved in a variety of ways. By proceeding from the requirements of the first view of the content of Noachide law, which is the baseline position in Noachide law, to that of the second view, which includes much more. Like we said, all those laws. The second opinion says that, oh no, that's mandatory to keep all of these Jewish laws, except, of course, when the Torah says some kind of a statement which makes it an exception or which makes it exclusive for the Jew. Like it says, speak to the Jewish people, telling them, then we understand that that's, for some reason, exclusive. Or by adoption, whether in part or in whole, of others of the 613 commandments from the revelation at Sinai, where appropriate, see below, for reward. Again, that's what Rambam says, that we do not prevent the Noachide from keeping other commandments if they're doing it for reward. Or by finding other ways to fortify Noachide law by additional restrictions, strictures, and sanctions. The following are criteria of Ascent in the rational advance of Noachide law beyond its baseline position. First are the measures taken by society in order to separate itself from that which is, at baseline, permissible in Noachide law, in the interest of cultivating self-refinement. Simply, this means limiting crude gratification of desire. Now, for Jews, again, it's very clear that this is actually not only commendable and advisable, but it's actually mandatory. It's not necessarily so clear-cut. It's kind of gray as opposed to black and white, but it's one of the commandments, and that is sanctify yourself, separate yourself in that which is permissible. So the question is, what does that mean? And is that individualized as opposed to one size fits all? But it definitely is a commandment for the Jew. Here we're speaking about the Noachide, though. By the biblical account, a deep social denigration preceded and led to the destruction of society by the flood. That's what really happened. In response to this, the nations limited themselves in the realm of sexual license, such as in premarital sexual relations, even where this did not involve infringement of basic sexual prohibitions. All right, that's how it's explained by the commentaries, that right after the flood, and as a result of that, they took upon themselves this extra stringency, which is not part of the prohibition of the Noachide commandments of adultery. But they said, it's not appropriate, it's not proper, and that's what they took upon themselves. They also backed up certain of these restrictions with sanctions. So also curbing other forms of indulgence of destructive habits or appetites, which are not beneficial to individual character or social harmony, would be included here. So again, if you give me a list of rules and restrictions, fine. Otherwise, it's kind of vague. So first of all, we're saying that they did take upon themselves certain restrictions, but in general, in the spirit of the law, each individual should try to be more refined. A second criterion for moral advance can be in the adoption of measures which express the value of care for others. This is a group of laws which persons can take upon themselves, that they are supererogatory, i.e., calling for conduct beyond the ordinarily expected or reasonable call of duty. And again, it's like, well, I don't have to do this. That's true, but it's better for you and for the neighbor and for the world. So do this or don't do that, even though technically you may not be breaking any law by not adhering to it. Such laws are found amongst the other commandments given at Sinai, which, for example, require one to go lengths to return lost property of others, for a Jew that is, or to feed one's animals before oneself. That is an absolute requirement for a Jew. It's not optional. It's not a nice thing to do. If a Jew sits down to eat his meal before he feeds his animals, he is actually transgressing a law in the Jewish code of law. In general, this means the adoption of precepts, whether in part or in whole, or in some modified form, which ascend in regard for others. So that would be the general idea that a Noachide needs to be cognizant and more sensitive to others, other people, animals, Just be less selfish and self-centered. Amongst the other 613 commandments of the revelation at Sinai, there are those which are generally super-rational in character, but also have an albeit heightened rational dimension. Thus, there is a commandment amongst the 613 commandments disallowing circumstantial evidence in the judgment of capital crimes. Now, circumstantial evidence is evidence that no one saw, but which is conjured from context. And it's pretty solid. I think it's fair to say that in most civilized places today, circumstantial evidence is pretty much accepted proof. It does not have the certainty of direct eyewitness report, but operates with probabilities. Amongst the reasons given for prohibiting it in Jewish law in cases of capital and corporal punishment is that if one begins to work with probabilities, one can then come to accept even weaker degrees of probability to the point of actually producing a false conviction. Now, one can make the argument that even eyewitness reports are not absolute. So, first of all, we're not assuming that the two witnesses are lying. And that itself is a whole discussion, lots of details, how we interrogate the witnesses in order to, the best of our human ability, determine and conclude that they are in fact saying what they saw. Now, secondly, one can say, well, they didn't understand the situation. In Jewish law, again, because it's so different in so many ways than what we're accustomed to in a secular court. So even though in so many ways it's so similar, it's basically a system of justice with a judge or judges or a panel and witnesses, etc. In certain ways, it's so different. The witnesses are strictly testifying to the facts. We don't allow the witness to state his opinion or give any type of judgment. I understand that perhaps, at least in the United States, theoretically, it works the same way. But the witnesses can present certain things in certain ways. By Jewish law and a Jewish court of law, the proper way to do it is the judges are supposed to stay focused, and the witnesses have to stay focused and just tell us what you saw without any assumptions. So at the end of the day, is that absolute? No. Is there any way that we will convict an innocent person? The answer is yes. However, you can't compare that to accepting circumstantial evidence. And therefore, the problem with circumstantial evidence is, where do you draw the line? So by Torah law, this biblical law, even before we get into the rabbinic part of it, it's very extreme. And therefore, it's very clear, it's very black and white. We simply don't accept anything less than eyewitnesses' testimony, what they actually saw. The same applies to the disallowance in Jewish law of conviction in a capital crime case based on self-incrimination. Whilst this is taken also to be a super-rational law, so technically it's called a choik, it's super-rational. Yet a reason is also offered, namely that a morbidly depressed individual wanting to suicide could produce a false confession to a capital crime. Thus, he gets the court to do the work for him, and they put him to death. So that may not be likely. That's not the point. It's a possibility in certain cases. Therefore, there is no self-incrimination accepted. So when the person admits to a crime where without his admittance, we don't have the proof. If he admits to it after the two witnesses, or not even after, if he admits to it after we have two witnesses that are eyewitnesses, then his admittance doesn't help or harm us, so we ignore it. So we still would convict him and would still, kill him or whatever. But if there's only one witness, which by Torah law is not enough to convict him, or no witnesses, of course, and he testifies against himself, and he admits, we do not act about it. We do not believe him, so to say. Generally, the commandments prohibiting self-incrimination and circumstantial evidence in capital cases are each termed a super-rational decree of the verse. Gzeras HaKosov. In other words, according to the Jewish tradition, according to the Torah, it is by definition not rational. It's a decree of the verse. And as such, are not mandatory under Noachide law. Because remember, our whole discussion here is only to what degree and do the Noachide laws incorporate and include all these other mishpatim, the rational laws, the civil laws. But if it's a chayk, if it's an irrational, a super rational law, that doesn't apply to Noachides. So here too, these two examples of self-incrimination and circumstantial evidence, those are technically super rational, and therefore they would not apply to Noachide law. And therefore, a society is permitted to take upon itself the stringency of following either of these prohibitions. Doesn't mean they're not allowed to. They would be allowed to take it. This, however, would presume a state of advanced social order which can afford to make criminal conviction harder, as discussed below. So there's a concept that we say sometimes you're being strict is actually leading to a leniency. Or, in other words, by the Jewish, it's clear. So you say, what do you mean? The guy, and no pun intended, literally got away with murder. Everybody knows he committed the crime. And by Jewish law, court is legally, has its hands tied. They have to set him free. And remember, there's no in between. It's not like, okay, let's not kill him. We'll just sentence him to life in prison. No such thing. Okay, we'll just sentence him for 25 years. No such thing. 10 years? Nothing. Basically, with very few exceptions, the term of imprisonment does not apply. There is no such thing in Torah law. There's no such punishment, which is a discussion for itself. So, you have a person, and this is the classical case, chasing after someone else with a weapon, screaming, "I'm going to kill you." And there are many witnesses watching this. And they run into an abandoned or secluded area, a house, whatever, chases after him. And in Talmudic time, it would be with a sharp knife or something of that nature. And he said, and everyone heard him say, "I'm going to kill you." And the guy says, "Please don't. Make it very dramatic, as you please." Or modern day, he has a gun, a pistol, and then you hear the shot. And there's no way that anyone else did it. There's no crowd. There's no one else there. And then as soon as the witnesses come into the scene, he's already holding the dripping knife with this person's blood over him like this. So nobody actually saw him stab him. Or he's holding the smoking gun No one actually saw him pull the trigger and shoot the man. There is no other possibility, or at least in our world, whatever, in the world of probability and in the world of whatever the calculation would be, millions or even more than that, there is no practical chance that that person got away with murder. We're not allowed to kill him. Can't do anything. We can't do anything to him. Seems so unfair, so extreme. Okay. So now that would not apply in Noahide laws because this is super rational. And as I just demonstrated, it really doesn't make any sense if you take it to that classical, dramatic, extreme case. Okay? So you're with me. Makes no sense. Seems unfair. The murderer got away with murder, and it was premeditated, first degree, intentional murder. He got away with it. So that can't apply to the Noachites. Fine. Question though, can they be extra stringent? Can the Noachite community decide we want to be strict and we want to take the Jewish standards? They can. But you understand that stringency will be a big lenience because now many more criminals will be able to get away with the crime. Other of the 613 commandments, which are more thoroughly super rational, such as those dealing with ritual purity and impurity. So those are completely super rational, because what I just told you, we were just discussing now about, let's say, circumstantial evidence versus eyewitnesses. That, as we said, one can argue that it does make sense. So even though technically, officially, it's super rational, but it does make sense because, as we said on the previous page, if you will accept circumstantial evidence, it will lead to very weak proof, and it will lead to punishing innocent people. However, when you get to a completely different topic, totally different subject matter in the Torah, and that is purity and impurity, that is completely super rational. Or relating to the sanctity of the produce taken as agricultural tithes in the land of Israel, or the sanctity of objects in the service of the temple and its upkeep. Now, as all this spirituality have a more limited relevance to Noachide law, even should persons want to adopt these laws, it won't be so simple. Say, wait a second. No. Whoa. Take it easy. This is like out of your domain. Certain areas of these laws can apply only to Jews. No question about it. Such as the status of the Nazarite. Okay, well familiar with that. One who does not cut his or her hair, abstains from wine and contact with the dead. Basically, it's those three parts to a Nazarite. Nazarite, don't confuse with anything else. That is a Jew exclusively, man or woman. It's a form of a vow. All they have to say was, I hereby am, or I hereby take upon myself to be a Nazir. That's it. They said those words, boom. That person now is forbidden to cut their hair at all. No trimming, nothing, no haircut. Forbidden to drink wine or any grape or raisin derivative, no grape juice, none of that. And they cannot become defiled. They cannot come in contact with a dead body, even if it were to be their immediate relative, such as a parent or something like that. All right. How do we know that that doesn't apply to that a non-Jew can't take it upon himself? Well, the Torah says very clearly, it's one of those verses that says this applies to the Jews, sons of Israel. So there you have it. You have the it's clearly making it an exemption. Even were a non-Jew to commit to adhere to all the prescribed forms of behavior of the Nazirite, he or she would not thereby become one. How do they say it? If it walks like a duck, etc., not always is that true. Just because the person calls himself a Nazirite, said I'm a Nazirite, and they keep these 3 laws, that doesn't make them a Nazirite. The above does not mean that the service of the temple is not of great significance to humanity at large. To the contrary, it is called a house of prayer for all nations, and it achieved great protection for all nations. So when it comes to the Nazirites, there's a clear statement when it's introduced, when God speaks to Moses. So he says clearly over there, tell the sons of Israel. And just to share with you, how do you know that it applies to women? It says sons of Israel. Maybe it's also an exclusion for the Jewish women. So you don't even have to get into the fact of saying, well, sons of Israel is basically a generic term. It's the plural for all of the Jewish people. You don't have to come on to that, because the very next words over there are a man or a woman that, and then it goes on to tell you the whole story of how to become a Nazirite. So it says clearly, first, there is the exception. First, it's making clear that the exclusion of anybody who's not part of Bnei Yisrael, they are excluded. It says, speak to Bnei Yisrael. And then there's a clear inclusion for all Jewish men and women. Okay, so now we know it. So a non-Jew cannot become a Nazir. Why? You don't have to understand it. You can come up with reasons, but you don't have to say there's any reasons. You can say that it is in the realm of those commandments that are super rational. Doesn't matter. We know that a Noachide cannot be a Nazir, end of story. Just because at the end the Nazir has to come to the temple and shave their hair completely and bring certain offerings. So you say, oh, well, I want to come to the temple. It doesn't mean you have nothing to do with the temple just because this service is out of bounds for you. Is he saying that the house of prayer for all nations, that's the verse in Isaiah, the very famous verse, that this is the house of prayer for all nations. And in the times of Mashiach, all the nations will come flocking to the Holy Temple, the third temple. Furthermore, there is a tradition in the Oral Torah that says that if the nations of the world only knew their benefit from the Holy Temple, that it protected them, they would have set up fortresses of armies protecting the temple, not to allow anyone to come, as ultimately it was destroyed twice. They wouldn't have, the nations of the world wouldn't have allowed that, and they realized the importance of the temple for them. There are, furthermore, certain of the 613 Jewish commandments, the performance of which is not permitted to a non-Jew. Clear. They can't do it. This is preeminently so in the case of the observance of the Sabbath, in the way a Jew keeps it through cessation of specific forms of work. Okay, without getting into it too much, I'm aware that in the Noachide world, there is a movement, a discussion, whatever, having to do with the Shabbos. What it says is clearly that a non-Jew that, quote unquote, keeps the Shabbos, that is a capital offense. Now, we didn't actually kill the person if he did, but they should just, the language is that they are obligated to be put to death. But it's not it doesn't transgress any of the 7. So the Jewish court would not actually kill them, but just to bring out the severity of it. Question is, what does that mean and to what extent? Okay, so let's just make it. Let's go to where it's clear and undisputable, and that is for a non-Jew to keep Shabbos in the same form to the same degree that a Jew is obligated to keep it. That is forbidden. There are 39. It says 40, but there are 39 chief labors that are biblically forbidden for a Jew to do on the Sabbath. 39 general categories of work. Each one of them contains dozens of subdivisions, which are just as prohibited, biblically prohibited, and the penalty would be death for the Jew. If a non-Jew keeps Shabbos in the same way, that is forbidden. Shabbos is a gift for the Jewish people. And therefore, to literally keep it in the full sense is clearly, undisputably forbidden for a non-Jew. The same applies to the study of the Torah in its abstract totality, as a study for and in itself. I think he was very careful with the wording, the way he said it over here, and I think that sentence is very good. It's true and accurate. Let's read the sentence again. The study of the Torah in its abstract totality as a study for and in itself. That is forbidden for a Noachide. Torah is a gift that was given exclusively to the Jewish people. I'm not saying the non-Jews have no attachment or connection or association. The Torah itself, in its abstract form, for and in itself, that type of a study is the gift of God to the Jewish people. And it is forbidden for the Noachide to study it in such a fashion. At the same time, there are rational, inner-worldly aspects of each of these 2 Jewish commandments which do pertain to humanity at large. The observance of the Sabbath is relevant to Noachide law inasmuch as it is a day of reflection upon the creation of the world and the existence of the Creator. And again, that's really based on one commentary, but he wants to go along with it. So that's fine. I'll play along. This is not the first time he referenced it. Footnote 68, he's mentioning the commentary of the Kli Yakar on Exodus 28, which is where that is in the 10 Commandments, where it speaks about keeping the Sabbath. So it's a very interesting commentary of the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is definitely a very reliable commentary. Okay, everybody within the traditional Judaism holds of the Kli Yakar, but it is one commentary. It is his explanation, which is beautiful. Fine. Anyway, he does explain that the testimony of Shabbos to the world that there's a creator means that the world is supposed to identify and recognize that this is the day of rest for the Jewish people. But still, it's a day that they're supposed to contemplate on that. So in other words, they do have a connection to Shabbos. Not that they're not supposed to go to work, but they're supposed to take time every week on Shabbos to think about creation, creator, etc. But not in respect to cessation from specified work. That's too much. That they can't do. And again, the second example, the study of Torah is pertinent also to the extent that it is necessary for the fulfillment of the Noachide laws and other commandments which one is free to observe voluntarily, right? How are you supposed to know what to do? Especially since we're saying the Noachide laws are so detailed. So of course you're supposed to study it in the source, in the Torah. Maybe translation into English, that's still Torah. Many Jews who don't yet know the Holy Tongue, the biblical language, they study hours of Torah every day in other languages. I don't know if you even can imagine how many volumes, how many languages, how many Torah books are translated into so many languages. I mean, here in America, we know of English, fine. There's a world. And I think English is probably the top as far as the translation of the Torah, but it's translated into many other languages, not two or three others, many other languages. But English, for sure, you have the entire Tanakh, obviously. Most all of the primary commentaries on the Tanakh translated. The oral Torah, all of Mishnah, all of Talmud, so much of Medrash, all of the Zohar, the Kabbalah, the esoteric, the mystery part, and on and on and on. So much of it is translated. Who's that for? I got news for you. They're not translating it, or at least primarily not, for the Noachites. It's meant for the Jews that don't yet or are not fluent enough in the original. So they need this crutch of a translation. So if a Noachite is studying from an English book, that's still Torah. And not only is that permitted, but how in the world is he supposed to know the commandments if he doesn't study it? Apart from these two, should an individual wish to keep various other commandments of the Torah with their details, he or she may. Okay, I don't know if I would say it like that. He just almost made it sound like there's only two exceptions, Shabbos and study of Torah. But again, he said all of the super rational ones don't count, so take all those out. So it means all the things of purity, impurity, sacrificial things, holy temple, all that is out. Okay, that's a huge chunk of the 613. And likewise, what else did we say is an exception? Within the laws, anything which is clearly super rational, completely, also is out. And then wherever the Torah makes a clear exemption, so those two. So after all that, yeah, but so what's left is whatever number is left, a Noachite can take upon himself, with the exception of Shabbos and Torah study. There is also a virtue, though no obligation, in performing those other of the 613 commandments which one is permitted to perform, wherever these are explicitly associated by tradition with greater refinement of character. Okay. Footnote 71, even though it's just a footnote, but that carries a lot of weight, and one can say, oh, wow. He's bringing 3 examples. Such might be the additional sexual prohibitions in which the Jewish people were commanded, which means besides what the Noachites are forbidden, the Jewish people have a much, much longer list. So that might fall into the category, he says over here, where it is virtuous, because it's all about refinement of character. And the laws of forbidden foods. So again, even though the Noachites only have the prohibition against eating part of an animal that was removed from the animal when it was still alive, he says all the laws of kosher, which is huge leap. All the laws of kosher, because again, arguably, what is that all about? Even though kosher is clearly super rational, it's about refinement. And so also circumcision. Because again, Noachites do not have to circumcise their children. And circumcision falls into the category of super rational. But it's explained that by circumcising that organ that tames and controls the person's drive in that area. So again, all about self-refinement. So he just threw into this footnote that, all of the prohibited marriages, etc., all the laws of kosher and circumcision. Might. He didn't say it with certainty. Certain commandments are associated with a particular sanctity and personal preparation known to the Jewish people. And it is appropriate that Jews should alone fulfill these commandments, such as writing or fixing a mezuzah, or wearing tefillin, phylacteries, or writing a scroll of the Torah. Okay, those are exclusive for the Jew. And of course, he brings down the Rabbis on the laws of kings. In the words of the Rabbis, it has to do with the sanctity, the kedusha of the Jewish people, and therefore those are not optional, and they're out of bounds for the Noachide. There are, moreover, certain commandments associated with the essential identity of the Jewish people, such as the wearing of fringes, tzitzis, or the eating of matzah, unleavened bread, on Passover, or the taking of the 4 kinds on the festival of Sukkot, the lulav, which pertain exclusively to the Jewish people. Okay, so first he's basically explaining which mitzvahs the Noachide can't do. This does not mean that the general humanity does not relate to the festivals of the Jewish people. They may, but not with the same detailed Jewish performance of these precepts, whether in the individual precepts performed on these days or in the Jewish form of desisting from work on them. So that they can't do, but they still can associate with the holiday. It is inappropriate that they should replicate these precepts, for these relate to the uniquely Jewish divine service in the world. And in the footnote he says, again, in order for a Noachide to be able to do a mitzvah, the argument Maimonides says because they want to get rewarded. Fine, but there has to be some kind of a association. Like, is it going to make you a more refined person? Is it going to refine the world? Like, what are you doing? So by taking upon yourself to return stolen, to return lost articles, that's good for humanity, etc., etc. But for you to shake the lulav, that's like a commandment between the Jew and God. So what exactly are you doing? So you say, well, I want to get rewarded. But it's irrelevant to the Noachide. When one actually carries out a practice which is not mandatory from the standpoint of Noachide law, one may not carry it out as something in which one has been divinely commanded. That's clear in Maimonides, right? Again, you want to do it, it has to be clear that you're doing it as an einoi mitzvah v'oiseh, which means optional. You chose to do what you're not commanded to do. For this is tantamount to positing a new revelation other than the specific body of Noachide law, given by God in its eternal principles and prescriptions at Sinai, which you can't do. In other words, one of the things you can't do, in the words of Maimonides, is chidush das, to invent or innovate a religion. So therefore, if you now do those commandments that you're permitted to do in a way of a commitment that you say, I chose to make it mandatory, that's a problem because it's not part of the 7. And it's not even by extension part of the general idea of making this world more peaceful and settled and etc. So at best, you want to do it as one who's not commanded, then those that you could do, except for all these exceptions, fine. but it has to be clear that you are not obligated. Okay, I think the way he put it was quite interesting and I would say pretty accurate. So we're up to page 164. We did not finish the chapter, which is fine. So hopefully next time we will continue on page 164, the conditions of ascending rationality. Questions, comments?
Boker Tov, Rabbi, from Australia. Boker Tov, it's Boker Tov in Australia. With the Jewish court system, it's 23 and 71. To me, if the world ran that way, you'd be better off.
That would fall into this category where they can, but even though those numbers that the Supreme Court is 23 members, and the highest Supreme Court is 71, for those that don't know, it's 23 members. So even though part of the explanation to how we get that number is rational, but I think it's fair to say that it falls into the category of Gzeras HaKosov, a decree of the verse. This is the number that God decided. And I'll share with you the, so to say, logic of how we get to it. It doesn't say anywhere clearly in the written law these numbers. It uses the word Ada. Ada means congregation. And from a different place, from one juxtaposition to another, we derive that word implies 10 Jews, just like a quorum, a minyan of 10. It uses the word Ada twice, where it's speaking about the court finding the person innocent and finding him guilty. Ada plus Ada equals 20 people. Problem with having 20 is it is an even number, and how can you have a majority if everybody votes? So therefore we have to add 1. That brings us to 21, but then there's a problem because when you have in a capital case, I hope you're following what I'm saying, I'm going a little too fast. In a capital case, in order to make the person guilty and to put the person to death, it is insufficient to have a majority of 1. You need a majority of 2. So it means to say you have to have, let's say, 12 against 10. That would work. So therefore, 21 is insufficient. You would need 22. Problem with 22 is you're back to an even number, and there could be a split of 11 against 11. So therefore, we add another 1 and make it 23. Now, that's a mix of rational and irrational. I was using logic. I didn't make this up. The Torah is using logic to explain a super rational concept. So that is exactly what he's talking about. So the Noachites have to have a court system. Dinim. Got it. Do they have to have 23 and 71? Nope. Can they? According to what he's saying over here? Sure. So to say that they should, that's the discussion over here. Like, basically, why not if they want to? But it's not like, well, that's the only true way that you can come to a real decision. You know, we spoke about having to have eyewitnesses and no relying on circumstantial evidence. That may not be the standard that Noachites have to keep. So, likewise, they don't have to have 23 and 71. You want to say that they should always have an odd number, that's fine. So the jury should not be 12 people. Make it 13. And we don't believe in superstition. And the Noachites should also not believe in superstition. And there's nothing wrong with 13. Make it 11, whatever the case is. But even so, there's nothing wrong. There's no prohibition against having an even number of judges.
Thank you, Rabbi.
James Gosnell.
Hi, Rabbi Turin.
Hi.
Thank you.
I've got a few things, so I don't know how much we want to talk about this. I got a statement. I want to back up what you were saying about Shabbos. And I wrote this down, so it's going to sound a little weird. I think the Talmud says a ger toshav rests on Shabbat like a whole hamoed. So I'd think a stam, a plain ben Noach, wouldn't be keeping Shabbat like a Yisrael. In other words, if it's a different, lesser category to begin with, if a ger toshav keeps Shabbos like a whole hamoed, not like a full Shabbat, then I would think most definitely a ben Noach wouldn't be keeping Shabbat like a Yisrael. And what else?
What are your thoughts about a ben Noach keeping Shabbos like Chol HaMoed, like a ger toshav?
I don't think it would be appropriate. I think he would need to do the ben Noach would have to do the 7 because the Torah says so. Ger toshav, like a ger toshav. I think there's, in other words, I don't want to get into it because I don't want to what I would get into. It would be different dinim. I do believe that there's different dinim between a stam ben Noach, like it would be a moral atheist, would be an example, and then someone who is a ben Noach does the 7 because the Torah says so. I think that's a different category, a different getter. So then I think that's what I think kind of needs to happen. He's like a ger toshav. Of course, he's not a ger toshav because that's not accepted today, but that's what I would.
Fair enough. Your next point.
We're studying Tanya, part 1, chapter 6, and it just got done talking about Yisrael, a Yisrael sanctifying the name. If heaven forbid he's killed because he doesn't want to do a vote, well, if he's killed because he doesn't want to do a voda zara, he's completely bittul, and he sanctifies the name. We had some questions because we're studying it as non-Jews, okay? And we had a question, and I'm facilitating this study, where what happens if a ben Noach doesn't want to do a voda zara and they're threatened with death and put to death? Do they sanctify the name?
Excellent question. It's discussed, and to the best of my recollection, a Noachite is forbidden to give up his life for not to transgress avodah zarah. And if he were to give up his life, he would not be sanctifying Hashem's name. I think that's the bottom line. And I need to look it over.
Okay, thank you. You know me, I'd like to see what the Hebrew for that. I appreciate that.
1 second, so I don't forget. Let me just get it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, while I'm looking, next point.
This is something I've been thinking about in regards to Bob, actually, who asks really good questions pertaining to this subject. In my work with, it actually involves my work with artificial intelligence. For a reward, for SCAR, I'm under the impression that is more or less a selfish quality.
Say that again.
Doing something for a reward, like let's say it's a selfish reward, just to clarify, and it seems contradictory. Why can't I feed my animals first, not for SCAR, but for the sake of heaven, or any of the other mitzvahs beyond the 7? In other words, what if here's another concept. In other words, what if my reward, my SCAR, is for the sake of heaven? What if for the sake of heaven is my heuristic and it's not something selfish? I know that's a deep question.
I think what we saw tonight, I think the way he put it is those types of mitzvahs you don't need to do for schar, for reward. He introduced that part only after he spoke about all those other things, such as feeding your animal before yourself, or returning a lost article. All those things, you can do it for the higher cause.
Excellent. Excellent. Very good. Because it would seem contradictory, because how are we going to beru our soul, so to speak? How are we going to refine it if we're being selfish? So thank you for that clarification.
I think that's his intention. That's the way he put it, because he only brought in that about the reward when he was started to speak about additional things. If you want to do more, and then he said you could do anything except, and then he started, Shabbos, Torah, and then he cut out all the ones which are Kedushas Yisrael, and then the ones which are unique to Jewish people. First he said anything.
Yeah.
So that's when he introduced doing them out of just for the sake of reward. Okay. It is the answer to your question about the giving up one's life to sanctify Hashem's name. So that is in Sanhedrin 33b. And the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvos, in his list of the 613 commandments, positive mitzvah number 9 is where he talks about it, quoting that piece of the Talmud. The only question I'm wondering is it permissible? I understand they're not obligated. A Jew is obligated to give up his life. The question is, can a Ben Noach voluntarily do it? So he says like this.
But what made me think of this was in regards to being like a Cohen Gadol, or in other words, like what could a non-Jew do complete with his whole being to have complete bittul in that aspect? And it was in regards to Torah studies, what the Alter Rebbe was talking about, not for the non-Jew. He's talking about a Yisrael.
Sure. Okay, so the Rambam says as follows, and they ask, the Talmud Sanhedrin 94b or 93b. There's a mistake in one of these places. I think it's 93b. Anyway, there's a typo. Are the sons of Noah commanded to sanctify the name or not? So the Talmud says, come in here, I'll give you a proof. And then it quotes, 7 mitzvahs were commanded the sons of Noah, and if they were commanded to sanctify the name, there would be 8. End of quote. Says the Rambam, it is clear then that this is included in the mitzvahs incumbent upon Israel, this being corroborated by, and I shall be sanctified in the midst of the children of Israel. When it speaks about this commandment of giving up one's life to sanctify God's name, it says, V'niktashti, I will become sanctified, b'soich b'nei Yisrael, amongst, in the midst of the Jewish people. The laws of this mitzvah have been explained in the 7th chapter of Sanhedrin. Okay. So clearly, a Noachite is not obligated as a Jew is. The question is, can he voluntarily do it?
Now, forgive me. There was a story, and I don't know if this is related, but a Yisrael was getting executed or for not bowing down to a doing avodah zarah, and the executioner, the non-Jewish executioner, threw himself in the fire as well, because he saw the holiness of the Yisrael, and for whatever reason, I don't know if that's related or not. Anyways, I'll look that up. Thank you.
See, if a Jew is not obligated to give up his life, he's not allowed to, because we learned that out from a different verse that says "V'chai bohem," that one must live in them. So if it's not one of the 3, and if it's not in a time of Shmad, if the non-Jew is not doing it in order to have the Jew transgress, like he's doing it for his own pleasure, so it's not one of the 3, and if the only reason why the Jew is being forced to transgress is for the non-Jew's pleasure, like he wants a meal cooked for him, so he's forcing the Jew to cook on Shabbos, not because he wants him to break Shabbos. He says, I want food now. So the Jew is not allowed to give up his life, because it says that you must live in the mitzvahs. So it's only because those three are an exception, or the circumstance where the reason would be. So in that case, the Noachide may not be allowed possibly to give up his life for the sanctification of Hashem's name, because it says he obviously is not obligated to. He may not be allowed, I'm not sure, because he's giving up his life, and what gave him a right to give up his life, even though he's doing it for the highest cause of sanctifying Hashem's name. So I'm not sure.
Interesting. Thank you. Have you ever seen anything when it comes to, because we were talking about chapter 6, Bittul and Torah, Oisek, deep involvement of Torah study. The Rambam in Hilchot Malachim 10:9 says that, I would say in the Akum, right? But a lot of translations say Gentile. But even the Rambam says they can study the 7 and be Oisek in the 7. Now, if we apply what the Alter Rebbe talks about in the Tanya about being Oisek in the Torah, I have a theory. Now, I'm not talking about Taryag mitzvahs like a Yisrael, but it appears to me there's an interaction with that divine soul. Then there's you're being oisek in the wisdom of Hashem, which is the essence of Hashem. Have you ever come across anything like this when it comes to non-Jews? Because I'm trying to apply the mechanics of Tanya to Hilchot Malachim 10:9. A non-Jew being oisek in the 7 through the Torah.
Are you talking about chapter 5 or 6?
It's actually mentioned in 4, 5, and 6, where the Alter Rebbe talks about the unification of the Yisrael involved in Torah study. But he's got to be oisek. He can't be lamed. It can't be just like a cursory study of because he's got to take a test the next day, so he doesn't care. It's somebody who's deeply involved in wanting to know the wisdom of Hashem. And that's why it pertains to sanctifying the name with complete bittul, complete submission, so to speak. So I have a theory that that's like the beginning of what I would call Katsas Gerus, not one that you guys would accept, but
I don't know. I need to give that some thought.
Thank you. I that's where I am. Like that, I think this is where we want to be with all of humanity, getting them involved in Torah, like deep involvement, to get them to that level, that madrega of Ger Toshav. I'm not saying Ger Toshav is accepted today, but preparing them for Mashiach. This is Geula, in my opinion. So, but thank you so much for hearing what I had to say, and thank you for looking into it.
Very insightful, sure. So I hear what you're saying. I gotta see if I agree. All right. Thank you, everybody. Till next time. Sure. All the best, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well. Mashiach now.
You will.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Amen.
Good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are on the globe.
Boker Tov, Greg.
Boker Tov, mate. Have a good day, eh?
Yeah, you as well.